Welcome to Effective Bible Teaching session number 11. In this session, we will run through several tips and tricks for the classroom to help you better prepare for your teaching assignment. Your practice teaching will be due at the end of week 12, so not this week, but the end of next. So more on that later. First, we're going to look briefly at the reading, and then we'll look at some of my own observations that I want to share related to teaching in the classroom. But first we're going to look at the Call to Teach chapters. The first chapter 3 talked about teacher as clear communicator, and Jan talks about the teacher as teller, where it's basically more of a monologue where I'm telling information or lecture. And he goes through the reasons for that and a defense for lecture, but also the way to do that appropriately. And then teacher as facilitator, which is basically helping to facilitate dialogue and group interaction and group conversation in the learning time. So it's not just one way, it's multi-way. Then he talks about a teacher as provocateur, one who kind of provokes, stimulates and raises the interest level of, and also provokes people to action and to think and to feel a certain way. So really this idea of being a stimulator of ideas. And then he also talks about the teacher as instructional technician, someone who needs to understand the technology related to teaching. So the visual aids, the audio-visual equipment, all the things that you would use from a technical standpoint to help in the teaching time. So those are some of the things he talked about in that particular chapter. I'm sure you read those, but they're good stuff. This next one here, chapter 4, deals with teacher's motivator, and we talked a little bit about that early on, and one of the papers that you were to read dealt with motivation in more detail. The 5 points he has here is teacher as shaper and shaping behavior using reinforcement, and what he says is first off, we do not punish our learners. We encourage them, we give reinforcement, and probably the best kind of reinforcement we can give to a motivated learner is praise. Hey, that was a great idea, good answer, that kind of thing. He also talked about motivation from a social model standpoint, where seeing you as the model, there are many dynamics that play into a learner wanting to be like the teacher. So it's a do as I do, watch my example. And Paul used that a lot. The example you see from me, follow that same example, this idea of the social model. He coined this word, the curiositeur, which is this idea of someone who creates interest and one who stimulates the interest and the curiosity of the learner. Maria Montessori, in her Montessori method, was known, part of her technique was to allow the curiosity of the learner to guide his or her own learning. And that's why in the Montessori method you see this very free and independent learning. Each child is doing their own thing because it's their own curiosity that's guiding that learning. This is the idea of allowing, of kind of stimulating the curiosity, allowing that curiosity to motivate the learner to want to learn. The next is teacher as friend, and this goes into the idea of having genuine, warm relationships with your learners, which is, of course, very important. You kind of see the model that Christ had. He wasn't just their rabbi and their teacher and their leader, but he was also their close and dear friend. And also, we see the last one here as teacher as success agent. The idea here is that we're trying to help our learners succeed. So we set them up for success. We don't set them up for failure. In the academic world, you might see professors, setting their students up for failure. Of course, not in seminary, but you might in other places. And so that's why they have a bell curve, and a certain amount of students have to fail, a certain amount have to succeed. And this idea of setting students up for failure, we don't do that. We set them up for success. We help them to succeed and to take these truths into their lives so they can be more and more like Christ. So this is what Jan covered in those chapters as some best practices. And also we look at the Creative Bible Teaching text, and the authors there have several principles. One of those, he talked about teaching principles, common practices of truly great teachers. What do? Well, first off, they have credibility. They give reliable information. Their motives are pure. They have warm and friendly relationships. They have a reputation that is good, that precedes them, that others talk about them as being good, as a good teacher. They show expertise, so they understand and know what they're talking about, and they show passion. They show excitement and passion and enthusiasm for what they teach. Really important. And those all talk about, speak to credibility. The next thing, truly great teachers communicate clearly. So they communicate their content clearly. They communicate the purpose or the reason for the content. So it's one thing to understand the material, but why is it important? So purpose is understanding that is clear as well. And also they have a clear structure, how they structure the content, and they're clear in their presentation skills. So all those things relate to how they communicate clearly. Great teachers also stimulate interest. We've talked a little bit about this already. They hook the learner with something that makes them go, wow, that's interesting, I want to learn more. And then they involve the learner in that learning process. So the interest leads that learner again to want to be involved. And then they equip the learner so the learner can do what it is that they're supposed to do, or have the skill set they need to continue on with that learning in their life. Next, great learners teach with style. So they use vivid words. They're good with their speech. They have purposeful actions, which would be their gestures and their movement and their body language. So they gesture meaningfully. And that's one thing I'll look for actually on your videos, to make sure that your gestures aren't repetitive or they're not nonsensical, but they actually serve to be a visual underscore of what you're saying. So vivid words, the words you use, but the actions, the gestures, and your body language should support the vivid words that you use. Eye contact, extremely important. They look at their learners. They use vocal variety. So their voice is not just a monotone voice at the same level and the same pitch. They have a variety of pitch, a variety of volume, a variety of rate. Sometimes they talk fast, and sometimes they slow it down. So this vocal variety is important. The visual display are all of the visual aids that you would use. So the projector, the PowerPoint, whatever it is, all of that is the visual display. That is part of their style. And then note-free delivery refers to not being tied to the lesson plan or to the notes. In fact, when you deliver, I would hope that you would be so familiar with the lesson that you don't really even need the notes. But if you do, they can be there. You can have them with you. I would just prefer that they're not right in front of you, that they're off to the side on a little podium or something, so that you can refer back to them if you need to. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But that note-free delivery is a better way to go, because now there's nothing between you and your learner, and your eyes are on your learners, not on your notes. Okay, they also talk about truly great teachers take the risk of creativity. The idea here is stepping out of your comfort zone to engage and to enrich learners in ways that they learn best. The problem is that we tend to teach in the way that we learn best, but our classes are full of people who are not like us. So we have to step out of our comfort zone to engage them in different and new creative ways, because those are the ways in which they would learn best. And as you do that, you become more skilled in that, and you feel more comfortable kind of taking that risk of being more creative. Can it fall flat? Absolutely. But that's okay. No one's going to throw you out. But you learn from that, and you stretch yourself. And then truly great teachers also value and respect their students. They see their learners as persons made in the imago Dei, in the image of God. And so you value and respect your students in just the same way that you would want to be valued and respected. Okay, now we're going to move on to a few of my own observations here. These are things that I have observed in my face-to-face teaching and learning experiences. And I've divided them into 4 kind of categories: the space, the expectation, the lesson, and the teacher-learner. So we'll start with the space. There are the space, the expectation, the lesson, and the teacher or leader, I should say. So talk about the space. In your teaching space, you need to try to eliminate all possible sources of distraction. What you don't want is distraction, because distraction is the enemy for focus and concentration and learning. So there are physical distractions, there are psychological noise distractions. So basically, the difference between these two is physical distraction and physical noise is something that physically is present or happens. So obviously, an air conditioning system that kicks on and the fan is so loud that the students can't hear you talk, or they can't hear themselves think. Well, that's obviously a physical distraction. If you're near a train track and the train goes by, well, that's a physical distraction or a physical noise. Psychological noise or psychological distraction is something that's happening inside the minds of one or more of the learners. Let's just say that in a particular town you live in, something happened in the town that's just got everybody rattled. And when they come to the lesson and they sit in the classroom, people are rattled by this happening. Well, there's some psychological noise, and you may have to deal with that before you move on with the lesson. And it could be something mild, but it could be something really, really big. For instance, psychological noise, maybe one of the learners, maybe a family member died that week, or maybe one of your actual, class, one of your actual learners, your students in your classroom, maybe they died unexpectedly. Well, now that is a huge psychological distraction that needs to be dealt with. And in some cases, you really can't go any further. You have to kind of deal with that before you can move anywhere else in the Christian education process. You got to deal with that huge psychological hurdle. Well, some other things here. Talking about eliminating possible sources of distraction. Okay, so look at the entrance to the room. Is the entrance behind the speaker, behind the lectern, behind where the teacher stands? If that's the case, do people walk in and out of that entrance while the lesson's going on? Is that a distraction? Yeah, it may be. So can you place somehow the chairs in such a way that the entrance to the room is behind the learner, so they can sneak in and out without distracting the class? What about windows? Or can they see through windows that might be distracting? So you've got a window off to the side here that's looking out on the children's play area. So while you're talking, they're looking at the children on the swing set and doing whatever they do out there. Very distracting to the learner. Movement, outside movement, like we talked about, or distractions as well. Say you've got a doorway and people are walking back and forth at the doorway, or there's a window in the doorway and little kids come up and stick their face in the doorway like that in the window to see what's going on, and it becomes a distraction. We talked about the air conditioning system or heaters kicking on and off and causing it difficult to hear or to pay attention, because obviously you've got now noise and other things going on. So look at the full physical setup of the room, where the visuals are, what's visually distracting. Sometimes you do have to stop and acknowledge a distraction. We talked about ignoring it may be a bigger distraction. This is where humor can come in handy. So something happens, for instance. I remember one time I was speaking to a large church group in their worship, in their fellowship hall, and while I was in the middle of talking, this little 4-year-old who had found her way to the bathroom and had some trouble came scooting back into the area where we were, and she was half clothed, and she yelled out, "I need help!" And so obviously that was a huge distraction, and it was funny, and the parents jumped up and grabbed her and they whisked her away and helped her. But we had to deal with that. So we had a little bit of a humorous moment there, dealt with it, and then moved on with what we were doing. If you don't deal with it, it hangs over your head like this undealt with, unresolved distraction that you need to deal with. So make sure that you do deal with it, or it becomes something that it's difficult to get over sometimes as a hurdle. So we talked about kind of eliminating distractions. Now let's talk about enhancing and adding to the learning atmosphere. So in the first group here, we're just kind of saying how do we get rid of these things. But now let's talk about what we can add to the learning atmosphere. Lighting is honestly really one of the biggest things that you could do for your learning environment. Steven Spielberg is known to say that besides having a a really good story, the most important part of his job as a film director is lighting, because the lighting sets the mood and it tells the story. Is there backlighting behind the teacher so that light coming through the window makes it difficult to see their expression and they almost stand as a silhouette? Is there backlighting coming from behind the learners where you can't see their expressions and understand, basically you just see silhouettes of their heads or faces? What kind of overhead lighting do you have? Do you have fluorescent or incandescent lighting? Fluorescent lighting is very popular, but it's also really bad. I mean, it's ugly. It's kind of a greenish, and it's a harsh light. One thing that could change, revolutionize the look of many Sunday school rooms and education rooms is by getting rid of not using the fluorescent light and adding in maybe floor lamps that shine up. They could be the halogen ones that shine up and reflect off the acoustic tile. You put several of those in a room and turn them on, you'll have wonderful lighting, but you'll also have a wonderfully different mood that fluorescent just cannot give you. We also have a lot of new LED lighting, which is really great stuff. You can adjust the color temperature of the LED lights. You can adjust the colors that come out of those things, and they're very bright, very efficient, cool, affordable. So that might be another option as you're looking to light your room. Don't just go with the lighting that's built in. Architects are really good at putting and installing lighting, but it takes an artist. It takes someone who really can craft the space to really make that light work. And sometimes you just can't use the architectural lighting that's in a room. You want to be able to create a mood that helps to support what you're trying to do in the classroom. And a lot of times, the architectural lighting is not it. Physical arrangement of the people and furniture. This is another almost as big as lighting goes. Is where do you put the people in relation to one another and in relation to the teacher, and also how do you arrange the furniture? Do you have a focal wall that everyone needs to look at and see? There may be a focal wall because you've got a screen, if you've got projectors, and that's fine. That's an important part of this arrangement. Do you have a podium that you use? You stand behind it, you stand beside it, you stand in front of it. Is it a big podium that you can hide behind? Is it small, just like a little, almost like a music stand? Well, my encouragement to you is, in the teaching time, is that you have some kind of little stand that you can put your notes on, but you have that off to the side, either to your right or your left side, and it's not between you and any one class member. Okay, you don't want anything between you and the class member, so you put it off to the side, and if you need to look back down at it to know where you are, to know what the next thing is, fine. But then your gaze goes off of your page, back to your learners, eyeball to eyeball, eye contact, and then you move on with your lesson. So it's kind of there as a crutch, but it's not there for you to have to be kind of married to. Can your audience, can your learners see other faces, or can they just see the backs of heads? If they can just see the backs of heads, then it's a very impersonal experience, and it's very much like an audience watching a performance. We don't really want that. But that is what happens. Or are they seeing faces and other faces? There's more of a personal dynamic that way. Should you use desks or tables or nothing at all in terms of where people sit? Do they sit at desks? Do they sit at tables? How do they, what kind of other furniture is in there? We'll look at some examples of these. And what should the teacher's relative position be to the learners? Should the teacher be standing up maybe on a platform while everyone's seated down below? Or should they be standing on the floor, while everyone's seated? Or should the teacher be seated along with the learners? Those have three different feels to them, three different purposes. In the center of the room, should you stand in the center of the room or off to the side? If you stand in the center of the room, that communicates one thing. I'm the center of attention. Off to the side, you're giving somebody else the center of attention. So there's some interesting ways of where to stand. Let's take a look at some examples of this. This is the most typical example I've seen. You've got a teacher who's the X, the orange X, and you've got the students sitting in chairs in nice, neat little rows facing the teacher. The problem with this arrangement, though, is each of these learners can only see one face. the teachers. And the ones back here are seeing the backs of heads and hopefully maybe seeing the teacher's face. Now the teacher can see all the faces, which is fine, well, most of them, but the learners can only see one face, and that's the teacher's face, and they can't see each other's. Well, that's maybe good for an academic classroom where you have a lecturer and that's all you need, but I think in our educational settings we need something a little different. By the way, an example of talking about being is the teacher way up high on a platform away from the learners. Here's this example of what that would look like here. So you've got the for instance, the pastor in the church who is up on a platform behind a big lectern, and he's high up and far away from the congregation or from the learners, right? Well, this has a certain kind of feel to it, doesn't it? I am up high, and I'm far away, meaning I've got authority and I'm distant emotionally. So there's an emotional distance and there's an authority of being high. And if they're in the center, like we have our podiums in the church in the center, I am also the center of attention. It reminds me kind of like these medieval lecterns where the pastor is way up high above the heads of the people, and so this connotes a sense of some kind of thus saith the Lord authority. And if that's what you want, then fine, that's where you need to be. Well, another way of doing that would be to lower yourself down and move closer. So maybe you are on the floor standing with your head above the seated learners, and you might be a little closer in. Have you ever noticed that on Sunday night, on Sunday morning, the preacher is usually right up on the podium, but for the Sunday night Bible study or the Wednesday evening Bible study, he's usually standing down on the floor with a little, music stand podium closer to the congregants. That communicates a more relaxed feeling, and that's why I think he does it. And then you have where the teacher is right at the same level and very close to the learners here, and that gives it a whole different feel. One of I'm just part of the group. We're just working this together kind of thing. Well, I prefer something along, closer along these two lines here, being closer with your learners. And if I'm preaching, obviously that's the expectation. But we're talking about not preaching, we're talking about teaching, which there's a whole lot of time we could spend on talking about the difference between those two. But or is there a difference at all? That's another question. But I prefer something along these lines where we go here into more of a semicircular pattern like this, where now I'm closer, or the teacher's closer to the learners, and the learners can not only see the teacher, but they can see the faces of each other because they're now more facing inward. So it's very easy for this person to see this person's face here, whereas before I couldn't see their face. All I saw was the backs of heads, or if any head at all. Another example would be more like this, where you're just part of the circle here. And obviously this would be an ideal situation where you're seated down and along with or close to the rest of the learners like this. This might be a situation where you're standing in front of these and you're closer to them. And this could also be like this situation as well, where you're seated. You could also be seated in this situation, but the problem is if you're seated here, this person might have trouble seeing you. So standing's a better option because they have to look over heads. In this case, there's no heads to look over, nor is in this case. So seated or standing would be fine in either of these situations. So I prefer this kind of situation like this because people could see each other, or this, which is even more intimate. Now, what if you've got a lot of learners? Well, a lot of learners would be more along the lines of like this. So I've got rows and rows and rows. I just put 2 rows here, but it could be 2, 3, or 4 rows. And this is more common when you have a lot of people in a space. I prefer to have it wider than deeper, meaning because I want more people to be spread out like from side to side at an angle, rather than deep rows where it's narrow like a shotgun. Because it's just narrow and long. Well, and the reason for that is because you get people lost in the rows, and then the distance from the professor, or from in this case the teacher, and the student grows and grows as the longer it gets. So I'd like to, rather than add chairs back here, I'd like to add chairs to the sides to kind of bring people in closer, and maybe even make it semicircular, which is more like this. I prefer this one with a lot of people as well, and you can keep adding semicircles all the way down, but you can bring them around as far as you can. I wouldn't necessarily do it in the round, because now people are looking at your backside, and that's not good for anybody. Also, you lose your focus wall if you do something like that as well. Now, if you have to have furniture, you could do something like this, which would be something along the lines of this arrangement, the chevron look like that, but then you put a table in front of them so they can put their coffee down like that or whatever. That's fine. If you have semicircular tables that you could use in this setting over here with the semicircles, that'd be even better, right? And I've seen some conference centers that have these semicircular tables that are just perfect. But the thing about a table is the table is a way to retreat behind something, and you know, that might be okay. That's fine, but it does tend to stifle openness when you're trying to build relationship with others. There's this psychological barrier of a piece of furniture in front of you. That's why I don't like you to have the lectern in front of you, because there's a psychological kind of barrier between you and your audience. And it's a good place to hide. And we don't want to hide. We want to be open. We want to be transparent as we teach. And we want the learners to be transparent as well. So we don't really like them to hide behind things, behind furniture. But if it's there, that's fine, and you can use it to your advantage. But as long as people can see each other. Now, there is with a larger group, there is a banquet seating arrangement, which looks something like this. And this has its blessings and its curses. Let me go through those just briefly so you can kind of see what I'm seeing out of this. Well, first off, the blessing is that you've got the round, you got the small group here that is its own little group. And that's fine because there could be a lot of sharing over the table. And maybe prayer requests over the table and a little koinonia going on here in each of these groups. I like that. That's nice. And it does add for a dimension of that closeness that we get in the circle configuration that we saw earlier. The downside, a couple downsides. The first downside, the most obvious downside, is that the people in these dark green circles have to turn their head, and they have to crank their neck or turn their chairs around to see the teacher or the focus wall. So that's a problem, and all these ones in green, the darker green, are going to have trouble seeing what's going on up here. Okay, so that's the first problem. The second problem is that even you know, you've got a group over here and you got a group way over here, and there's a lot of distance. Even though you're kind of close to this group, the room feels like you're very kind of lost and distant. The people back here are far away from the speaker up here, and that makes it difficult to feel that kind of closeness to the teacher and to the other members in the room, except for the group right you're with. And by the way, if you're with a group that you don't really know very well, then you feel really lost, because it's kind of a double whammy. I'm lost in this big group, and I'm also lost in this little group here. So the dynamics are quite interesting, but this can work. Another thing I don't like, particularly when it is a banquet and they've got these centerpieces. You know, they got a big centerpiece on each table. Well, now what that does is that creates a sight hindrance or distraction for the people on the other side of the table, because now these people have to kind of look through or past the balloons, the flowers, or whatever centerpiece is on these tables. So this can be a real problem if you have this configuration. Make sure your centerpieces are not high, that these people back here can see easily what's going on here. And what does help is to have the speaker with a large group, particularly on some kind of platform, and then your visual reinforcement and audio reinforcement, meaning your speakers, your speaker system, your microphone, and also your visuals should be visible on this focal wall, whether you have one or two projectors, so that everyone can see it. So again, this is kind of a blessing and a curse. It does accommodate a lot of people, takes up a lot of room, and you know, you got sight problems as well. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about room arrangement. I think I've made it kind of clear what my preference is the small, intimate round, so that or the round, so people could see each other and really be able to interact with one another. Well, some more things about the space I want to mention here is besides the arrangement, what visual, audible, olfactory, which is smell, tactile, touch, and tasteable stimuli can you provide or can you bring into the teaching space to help create a better look and feel that supports your lesson? Now, I'm talking about look and feel. When people enter your space, is there some kind of look or feel of the space that will help support your lesson? Well, first off, you can just you could just change your space by changing the lighting and making it a little bit more warm or whatever it is you want to do. But when it comes to the specific content that you're teaching, is there something you can do to help change the atmosphere of the space to reinforce that specific lesson? Here's an example. Let's say for a lesson of fishers of men, you're going to talk about Jesus talking to these fishermen, telling them fishers of men. Why not acquire somehow, someone's got this, a huge fishing net from, and then you suspend it from the ceiling. So when you walk in, it's just draped over the ceiling. You might can put Christmas lights in it, or you might can whatever you want to do to make it look kind of cool. But you've got this fishing net hanging over your head, as if the people under the net, your learners, are like about ready to be caught under this net. And indeed they were. If they're Christians, then they've been caught into the net and have been saved. This is the idea of fishing for men, right? So it becomes this visual icon and a really kind of a cool way to decorate the room that supports the message of fishing for men. Here's another example. For a lesson on world hunger, for instance, you provide a small portion of cooked rice and you wrap it maybe in a leaf, a banana leaf or something, and you give that to each learner as they come in, and you ask them to eat that. That represents the daily amount of food that the poor eat in India per day in, say, a particular region. And so now they've got a visual and a tactile and an olfactory, something they can smell, and a tasteable, something they can taste, visual aid here in their hand, and you've now created a place in the space that uses these senses to help support the lesson. Well, let's take that a step further. Let's just say that we want to combine that stimulus with maybe some adding some music. Maybe we can add some other visuals. Maybe we can add some pictures, or maybe people in the slums of Calcutta, children and men, the poor who have nothing. All I have is that rice, that little handful of rice that your learners are holding. That's all they eat in a day. That's all they have. Now you've created this amazing environment that's visual and audible and tactile. You can smell it and you can taste it. And it totally supports the idea of world hunger. So this is how we can take additional stimuli and use it to create a look and feel. We can even go all out and create a full themed environment. It's a full-blown simulation. Maybe you can, think of it this way. When you go to a theme park, you walk into the park that has, Western theme or whatever the theme might be, superhero theme. You walk in that theme park, and every part of it, the decorations and the music and the architecture, all of it, even the characters walking around, they all contribute to that theme, and you feel like you're immersed in that theme. Imagine talking about this idea of the Indian poor and the rice, and that's all they've got to eat. What if you just decorated the room like you're in the shanty towns that exist, these slums that exist in India? And so you get some old cardboard boxes and some tin, and you just kind of coat the room with that, and you have the music playing and maybe some smells that you could bring in that would be kind of get you there. There's a lot you could do there. Now, you obviously have to be careful. Everything you do should support and enhance the teaching, not distract or overshadow it. But there is some really robust themed environments that can really bring that learner into the learning in a way like nothing else can. I mean, imagine actually taking your learners and taking them to Calcutta and taking them to one of the slums in the outskirts of the city and let them, what if you could actually take them there and let them walk through it and see it for themselves? They would be changed. Well, what you're trying to do is you're trying to help simulate that in some way so that the lesson will even have a bigger impact. So what I'm asking you to do is to think through the ways in small ways and big ways. Why don't you just take one picture of a child and put it up on the screen? That's all you have to do. And that could be just enough to trigger that. Or get a big bag of rice and just set it there in the middle of the room. And that could be the one thing, the one little icon, the one little visual aid that will kind of get people to focus in on. That is all that this entire city will live on in a day. That's it. That one bag of rice, whatever. Okay, now let's talk about expectation. Now, so this is the second area. We talked about the space. Let's talk about expectations. Expectation. I love it when to create a sense of kind of like expectation, where the learners come in and they're going, oh, there's something that's going to happen here. Something's going to happen here. And you can create that sense of expectation by changing things up a bit. You could just rearrange the furniture purposefully. So you, rather than having them the way it's always been, you rearrange them. People walk in and go, what is this? What's going on here? There's a sense of something is amiss. Something's different. You could change the order of the way you do things. Rather than praying at the end like you always do, why not pray at the beginning? Maybe announcements should be at the beginning rather than at the end. But you do this purposefully. You arrange the order of what you do, and you arrange the furniture in a way that helps, again, to support the message or support the lesson. But by making these little changes, you're actually creating this heightened sense of awareness, this sense of expectation that something's different, something's going on here. You can kind of create this curiosity with a sense of mystery, or by causing learners to be a little bit off balance, just a little bit. I talked about that bag of rice. Imagine you have like a podium and you could just like stick this bag of rice, boom, right in the middle of the room. And then instead of the chairs being lined up like they normally are, you create a circle right around the bag of rice. So the bag of rice is right in the center, and all the chairs are in a circle right around the bag of rice. And people take their seats, and nothing is said. And they're wondering, what is this bag of rice doing in the middle of the room? And you do your normal stuff. You do, and you're not answering the question. People are going to ask it, but you just ignore them. You just go on with the first thing. Hey, what announcements do we have? Do we have a prayer request? Blah blah blah. And you're getting the curiosity up to a point where they're going to go, we got to know. And then you say, today is the day where as a convention we celebrate, world hunger. Ah, world hunger. And then you go into, the whole thing into the lesson. So you've created this sense of expectation by simply changing things up a bit, by putting this bag of rice there, by changing maybe the order of what you do or the arrangement of the furniture. So my bottom line is to be somewhat unpredictable. Okay? Just be a little bit unpredictable. If your learners come in and they know you're unpredictable, they know you've got something cooking, and they're kind of wanting to know what it is. And that creates this expectation I'm talking about. And I love that because they really kind of get into, what is he going to do now? What's going to happen now? But everything you do, again, must be purposeful and must support the purpose for the lesson. We just don't do it to do it. We don't just arrange the furniture just because. It has to somehow be related and support and enhance the lesson. Okay, some more observations about the lesson itself. All right, so use a variety of activities. We talked about this. I love this quote. The worst learning activity is the one that you use all the time. Okay, so we tend to just go back to our really, tried and true, but we need to vary it up and take that risk of being creative. And remember this is another thing about the lesson. Remember, you are a fellow journeyman and a Sherpa, not a professor. So You don't lecture. As a professor, I get to do that. But in the Christian education classroom, we don't lecture, right? We help the learner to discover the truths of Scripture. Don't just tell them about it. So remember the visit to the cave we talked about, where you gather all your people together, you get in the van, you drive hours and hours to the nearest, park with a cave, with the caverns, and then the ranger sits you down and it says the next hour and a half I'm going to tell you all about the cave that I've learned. But we don't want to do that. We want the learners to go in and to discover the cave themselves. Okay? And you're the Sherpa. You're the fellow traveler, and you're going to guide them to what you've learned, but let them reach out and touch and feel and experience it themselves. Sometimes you have to follow the Holy Spirit in another direction during your lesson. Now, I think that this should be rare if you have followed him in the construction of the lesson from the beginning. I mean, nothing occurs to him. Nothing surprises God. And he knows what situations and what the hearts and lives and minds of your learners are going to be in 5 days' time when you're teaching that lesson. So as he prepares you, he'll prepare you to meet those needs that you don't even know about, but he does. So if he's involved in the construction of a lesson, he might guide you in different ways, but when you present a lesson, it's probably exactly what people are going to need to hear. But there are times when the Holy Spirit has other plans, and you've got to be willing to follow those plans and to go where he wants to lead you. So that's important to remember. Remember, people are more important than the lesson. Okay? They are, obviously. But the lesson is also important for the people. So there's a balance there. And just make sure that you strike that balance. But more often than not, the Lord will direct you, if you seek it, will direct you to creating that lesson the way that those people will need it even before you know they need it. Learn how to pace your lessons and develop a feel for timing. Okay, this is important. Timing is important. The pace of your lesson. Okay, so I call it this time warp. There's a time warp between one side of the lectern and the other. Time feels differently for the teacher than it does the learner. Usually for the teacher, the time goes by very quickly, but for the learner, it kind of drags on. You might be thinking here, with this particular video you're watching, man, this is going on forever. But what I feel like, it's going by pretty quickly, because I'm involved and I'm engaged in it, and if you're not, then it goes on very slowly. Now, if you are engaged in really involved and active in the lesson, it goes by quickly too for the student, which is kind of what you want. Now, if you're not prepared, for the teacher, the time will drag forever because you're not prepared, and you kind of go, oh my gosh, how am I going to fill this time? And it really, really drags for the learner if you're not prepared. So that's a bad thing. The other thing is the amount of time that you think it's going to take to do an activity. It may, well, let me say the amount of time that it actually takes to do an activity may vary widely from what you put on the paper, what you think. So you might think, well, it's only going to take 2 minutes to do this activity, and it actually takes 10. Why'd that happen? Well, you have to learn how to think through that activity mentally as you design it. Engage the time more accurately. And that's a skill set that happens over time. And you could use past experience. You go, well, the last time I did that, it took 15 minutes. Well, I got more people. It'd probably take 20. So you can kind of gauge it as you go. And you might already have that kind of experience. But that is a skill set that you'll need, how to estimate time in your different activities. And don't forget time for movement between activities, and the passing out of materials, especially if you have youth or junior high, high school, or children, and you're actually physically moving from one side of the room to the other to do certain things. You're gathering in groups here and there, or they're going out of the room and gathering in groups doing things and coming back. All that time for movement, that takes time, and you got to factor that in, because otherwise you're sunk, because they're going to suck up all of your teaching time by their slow movement from place to place. And the other thing here I want to mention is, of course, the Hookbook took a structure will serve you well. So use that structure. Use it with a variety of activities that use multiple modalities and multiple intelligences. Don't be afraid to go into those intelligences, music and spatial intelligence and naturalistic intelligence, all those different things. Dip into those, study those a little more thoroughly, and begin to bring those kind of activities into the lesson time as well. Okay, and now my observations on the teacher leader. And here we go. Physical presentation matters. Physical presentation matters. A smile goes a long way. Smile to your learners. Learn how to smile. Practice smiling. Some people just have to practice grinning and smiling and look in the mirror. Am I smiling? That's really important. If you're not happy, if you're not joyful, if you're not showing that happy emotion of being there, then why are you there? I mean, if you look grumpy or look concerned or whatever, you're in the wrong place. Show the joy that Jesus has given you as you approach your learners, and that smile goes a long, long way. You know, eye contact and a smile establishes this bridge of goodwill, and honestly, eye contact is like the ambassador of goodwill that crosses over to your learners. It really does. It crosses that bridge. So eye contact and a smile are really, really important. I want to look for that in your teaching. Are you looking at your learners? Are you smiling at your learners? And that's huge. And that's why you can't have your head down looking at your notes. You got to look at them as you talk and as you interact with them. I would encourage you to dress at least one notch above your learners. I know that standards have changed and no one wears ties anymore, and that's fine. But whatever your learners wear, so if they're wearing jeans and t-shirts, then wear jeans and a polo, or slacks and a polo. If they're wearing jeans and a polo, well then wear jeans or slacks and a polo and maybe a jacket, like a blazer or something. Just one step above, maybe two steps above where they are. And the reason for that is because that does communicate to them your professionalism, that you're taking this seriously. And this is important. It does communicate importance. Okay? Now don't overdo it. Don't wear a tux. Don't wear a tie if no one there wears ties. Some people might do that and feel comfortable with the tie. But just make sure that you communicate professionalism and preparedness with your dress. And be passionate. That means talk with enthusiasm about what you're talking about. Believe it. And by the way, if God has worked this in you, then you can communicate with a certain level of passion because it's real. And that's important because that's very contagious, very contagious. And as we said before, it's so important to be clear as you communicate. And we talked about before with your content and with all the other things that you do. Okay, now preparation. Got a few things I want to say about you as a teacher, leader, and as you prepare for your lesson. First off, you need to run through your lesson at least once to make sure that there is a logical flow to your ideas and to your structure, and there's a logistical flow. Okay, now the logical flow is, I've said this, we've talked about this, and now we're going to go to do this. Does it flow logically? Does it build on itself as you move through the lesson? If not, you're going to have to kind of rework it. And logical flow can be a real hard thing. Sometimes if things are backward, it really can be very awkward for the lesson. So make sure there's a logical flow that just naturally moves from one step to the other. And the logistical flow has to do with the activities and the movement of materials and people to go do this and to go do that, and do I have the materials here? And sometimes you'll have students stand up to do something, and then they'll sit down, and then they'll have to stand up again because you forgot something. And so there's a logistical issue there. Or if they're in one part of the room and you need to bring them back to do something and then go back, you can waste a lot of time if you don't think through the movement of materials and of people. So think through that. Does it make sense? Is it economic? Practice using visual aids, props or other teaching aids. it's important that number one, your technology is working. So run through that, make sure your technology is working, know what buttons to press, know how to go backward and forward on your PowerPoint, know the volume on your microphone, whatever. Know all of that. Okay. If you have any kind of props, any kind of things that you bring in that you hold and that you want to show, like that big old bag of rice or whatever, work with that beforehand. Make sure you understand how to hold it, how to handle it, where to set it, how to set it down so it doesn't break. Work with it enough so you feel comfortable about, so you don't have to fumble with it. It should be second nature, like you've done this before. Okay, really important, because that kind of stuff can be a distraction. One more thing about that kind of distraction is if you're holding something in your hand and you're talking, you may not be conscious of what you're doing with that thing in your hand as you're talking. You could be twisting it or fiddling with it or shaking it or thumping it or whatever, and that becomes a distraction you're not even aware of. So if you have something in your hand and you want to show it, then show it, give it your attention, let them see it, set it down, and let it be there by itself without you fiddling with it in your hands. Unless you're pretty confident that you can hold it still without unconsciously moving and playing with it. Okay? So those are some pointers. I'm going to look for that kind of stuff in your video to see how to use your visual aids. Is it a natural click, 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 and then they go, or are you fumbling with the remote control because you don't remember where that little button is or how to point at it with the pointer, or do you have a teaching aid in your hand that is distracting? So those are things that you definitely need to work through and practice using. Always have some kind of backup plan just in case your power goes out or you lose your technology or whatever. That happens, and it's going to happen. Make sure you have a hard copy. If you're using your iPad for your lesson plan, make sure there's a hard copy there, because if that goes out, battery goes or something, it drops on the floor and breaks, well, you need to have a copy of your lesson with you, okay? And it happens, believe me. I remember my first sermon I preached, and the lights went out. Yeah, talk about a real shot to the ego, right? And the guy was just saying he didn't really need me anyway. But thankfully, the people there were prepared, and they had some extra lights that they could use. It was kind of weird preaching the flashlight, but it worked, So anyway, be prepared. And double check your materials list to make sure that you have everything you need ahead of time. There's nothing worse than having this really great, activity or visual aid or whatever, and you forgot one little ingredient that just now won't work. And then you have to tap dance and sing and try to describe what it was that this thing was going to do. Look at your list, make sure everything's there, gather it the night before, put it in a bag so it's all there together with your teaching material, with your Bible and your other stuff, and then you've got it all together in one place. Okay? And double check it just to make sure. If your learners are to come to class prepared to do something or to bring something, you say you want them to give their testimony, you want them to bring a baby picture of themselves or whatever it is, make sure to give them plenty of time in advance to do that. Okay? Just a word to the wise, don't spring it on them because they'll probably forget. Okay, a couple more things about preparation. The teacher is the lesson. As you stand there, this whole idea of you are the model, right? Do as I do. You are the lesson. They see you. That's why it's so important that we have to let the Holy Spirit work the lesson in you as you work on the lesson, right? The learners should see Christ in you and Him working in you. So as you allow the Holy Spirit to work in you, to work the lesson in you in your life, and you open yourself up to that, then you are more transparent to allow yourself to be seen as a work in progress to your learners. Okay, that's really important. It's also important that you confess your sin and receive Christ's cleansing forgiveness as you begin your preparation. So you pray, you say, forgive me, and you name your sin, and you just get it out there and allow Him to forgive you. Same thing as you come to the teaching time. Before you need to spend some time by yourself before you go teach, and doing the same thing. Remember 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sin, He is faithful and just to forgive us of our sin and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And that cleansing of the sin lowers those barriers, lowers the hindrances that the Holy Spirit, so the Holy Spirit can work in through you. He will not use a dirty vessel. So allow Him to clean you and make yourself useful in His hands during the preparation and the teaching time. And then also confess your utter inability to make a difference in the lives of your learners. It's not about you. You can't do it. Rely solely on the power of the Holy Spirit to do what only He can do in the hearts of your learners. You're just partnering along with Him, but He's the only one who could bring the growth. I remember when I was a youth minister years ago, I thought I was hired by the church to go and help make the youth group holy and to make them like Jesus. And so I did all these wonderful things, the camps and the Bible studies and all the things that we did in the community, and we really, discipleship, everything. And after about 1.5 years, I was exhausted because these kids weren't changing much. And it was through the beautiful encouragement of a lovely older couple in the church that just said, Robert, we just know we need to pray for you and pray for those kids. And it was through that relationship with them that I realized that it wasn't me. It was the prayer to God and God Himself who could do the changing. And it was in the praying that the work was being done, not my being a great youth minister. Although I knew I needed to do those things, the growth only came through the Holy Spirit. And like the farmer partners with God, and he does his part, and nature and God does their part, and the growth only comes through the Holy Spirit. So just remember that you can't do it, but He can, and He will. Okay, a couple things about the afterword, about the teacher leader. First off, really try to integrate follow-up for each lesson that you taught last week into your next lesson. So if they were supposed to go do something and acquire some attitude or do some kind of action, Christian action, allow time for reports and reflection in the next time about how it went. We talked about world hunger. Tell us about what happened when you went out to the food pantry and you helped. And these kind of reflections and reports can actually serve as hooks for the new lesson. Say you're teaching a series about charity, and the first one was about world hunger, and the next one's going to be about other kinds of charity that we can do. Well, maybe the testimony of what happened the week before when they went out to the food pantry, they met this family and they provided food, and there was this amazing life-changing moment. That could be a wonderful hook, a wonderful story that can be told to hook learners into the next lesson about charity or about whatever, world hunger or whatever you're talking about. So be prepared to hook these, to kind of connect these together with these stories that might come out of what happened. Another option is to do personal follow-up with each of the learners regarding lessons. Rather than setting time aside each week to do it, you could have a personal moment with each of those. Hey, so how'd it go this week? Tell me about your time at the food pantry. What are some things that you experienced? And so you could do that as a follow-up one-on-one with them. And it's your job to evaluate each lesson prayerfully and to determine the positive and negative aspects of the teaching and learning process for that lesson. So go in. What did you do well? What worked? What didn't you do well? What could you have done better? And keep track of that. And on that sheet, on the planning form, there's a space at the bottom there on the second page for that kind of notation about that, how well you did and your analysis of it. Okay, we're going to talk about the practice teaching, which is now will be due at the end of next week. Not the end of this week, but the end of next week. A couple things I want to make sure that you are aware of. First off, it is due at the end of week 12. We talked about that. Use the practice teaching evaluation for attitude form that I've included in the advanced system. That will be your guide. I will use that to grade you or to evaluate you, and your compadres will do the same thing. Okay, they'll use that as well. You need to gather at least 5 to 10 other people who are in your proposed learners' demographics. So if you're going to be teaching 20-somethings, you need to gather 20-somethings. If you're going to be teaching children, you need to gather children. Okay, don't swap that out, because I want you to use this on the group that it's designed for. Okay, if you want to have more people, that's fine. Okay, just be sure though to adjust your activities to accommodate the number that you have. So no pretending. So if you're expecting 15 people and you've got things for 15 but only 3 people show up, well, first off, you need to have 5 at least. But it may be that you have to adjust what you're going to do to accommodate those 5 when you needed 15. And I don't want you to pretend to say, well, let's just pretend we've got 15 here and this is what we would have done. No, I need you to teach the people that are there with the activities you've got, and you don't pretend that more people are there. Okay, because I want to see the real deal. This is real life, right? We're not going to pretend. You need to video record the entire session. So from beginning to end, I want to see it all. Please use a tripod or some way of giving me a stable, steady shot of what's going on. Okay, and you can have little tripods for your little camera phones. You've got nice big tripods for your video cameras, whatever. But just it needs to be a steady shot. If you have the ability to connect a microphone directly to the camera, that'd be great. Otherwise, make sure that the sound is clear. Make sure that not only can the speaker be heard or the teacher be heard, that you can be heard, but that your learners can be heard when they're dialoguing with you as well. Okay. If you need to have a microphone or a lav microphone, something on your lapel or handheld that is attached to a speaker system, that's fine. The camera will probably be able to pick that up okay, but will they be able to pick up the learners as they're responding? Because I need to hear what they're saying as well. Please be sure to have all activities video recorded and include a view of all the participants that are there, so at least get a scan of who's there, because I need to count them. I need to know how many people are in the room, and then make sure to videotape all the activities as we go. And if you want to have a cameraman, do that and hold the camera and shoot it like a cameraman would, then that's fine. That's good as well, as long as it's not shaking around crazily. And then please stick to the time schedule that's on your plan precisely. Okay, so be very diligent about your time. And I will email you the specific directions on how to upload and send your video files. Okay, you might get that from me or from somebody else, but you'll get an email about how to upload those so we can have access to those. And then once all the files are uploaded for viewing, you will complete the practice evaluation for attitude form for yourself, and then you will also fill it out on your compadres, okay, on your course mates. So they're going to be also evaluating you, and I'll use that same form to evaluate you, and then we'll put all it together to see how well you did. All right, well, that is all I've got, and I know it's been a lot of material here, but it's stuff that I really wanted you to understand, and not only that, but hopefully it'll help you prepare for going into the classroom and teaching.